Now, when I first became an atheist, I'm going to admit to you, I found it very freeing. I was loosed from all the constraints of my childhood. I was the captain of my own ship. It was very, very exhilarating, very heady times. And I was more than happy to share my views with you. I was not one to keep quiet about what I had become. I began to actively engage Christians on my college campus to try to dissuade them of their faith. A recent radio interviewer, the host, dubbed me a missionary atheist, and I think that's about right. I feel like Paul. I was persecuting the church. I was what every Christian parent fears their kid will run into. I was a knowledgeable, Bible-quoting challenger of their faith. You had to be pretty grounded to take me on. And I regret to tell you that sometimes I was successful in my efforts. I became a very active member of the atheist community. I joined the American Atheist Association. I attended a dinner with Madalyn Murray O'Hair, public face of atheism during that time. Now, it may surprise you to learn that I thought atheists were going to be the nicest people on the planet. I really did. I thought, they have truth. They have enlightenment. They're going to be so sympathetic and kind to those who are still burdened by the encumbrances of organized religion. And I was mistaken in this. I actually thought when I was going to meet Madalyn Murray O'Hair, I thought, you know, her public persona is pretty acidic, pretty vitriolic. And I thought, but I'm going to meet her and discover she's really just a grandmotherly type. And that was just her public persona. It was just like a leverage point for media, you know, for sound bites. But when I met her, the truth was, at least in my experience, she was worse. She was kind of pulling it together for the camera. That was at least my exposure to her. She was tough even on people within her own organization. In fact, she came to a very violent, and she was murdered by someone from within her organization. But to get a sense of how she was, I have a quote from her. When one of her sons, William Ray, became a Christian and subsequently a pastor, and I believe he still is. I haven't been following his career, but I think he still is. But when he first said he was now a Christian, she said of him, this is her quote, "One could call this a postnatal abortion on the part of a mother. I repudiate him entirely and completely for now and all times. He is beyond human forgiveness." Now, eventually, you know, I'm expecting that atheists are going to be so nice. And I thought, being freed of their own chains, they would have a sympathetic heart for others who were still chained. But eventually I came to a new conclusion, that many of the atheists that I were running into had not become atheists because they were actually seeking truth, as much as they really liked throwing shots at people. But they wanted a place from which they would be free of having shots thrown at them. You can't have shots thrown at you when you stand for nothing. It's a pretty safe place to start throwing stones at others. So I began feeling that they were intellectually cowardly. Now, even though I was still an atheist, they were my people. But I was disenfranchised from this group because I thought that they often were unkind and used people for fodder. Now, speaking of that, I was just speaking to a young man. He has a material on apologetics and worldview, and he was just about to go speak at a college campus at the invitation of the atheist professor. The class was, you know, by and large atheist, and he was invited to speak to them. And he took me aside and he said, "Because of your position, could you please tell me, do you think that anyone who's coming to hear me is coming to actually hear my thoughts about truth?" And I said, my honest answer is no. They're coming for entertainment. They're hoping that this professor will use you for fodder and just chew you up, and that they're going to sit and snicker at you. And he became kind of downhearted. And I said, no, don't misunderstand me. What you are doing there is extremely important. And let me tell you why. First of all, they're going to see something that those who have a view that supports the historical record and the defense of the faith issues, they're not crazy people. We did not check our brains at the door when we became Christians. There are solid, strong, valuable responses to the things that they bring up. That's the first thing you're going to give them. They may not buy it, but at least they will see you did not just check your brain. But here's the second thing. They're going to see that even when your opponent tries to bait you and tries to bait, not to debate, to bait you, tries to ridicule you, tries to set you up to make you look stupid, that even when that happens, you are respectful and caring. And that's the face of Jesus going home in their pockets. They may not know it, but they're going to go away with the sense that something was different there. That's not something I typically see, because out in the world, you know what? It's supposed to be a dogfight. And I have, and you probably all have too, the privilege of watching Ravi Zacharias in debates with some of the best minds on the planet. And it is so obvious when he is debating this person that his love for Jesus extends across to that person who's attempting to ridicule him. Every single time. He is the face of Jesus. He clearly cares not only about his arguments, but he cares about the person he's arguing with. And that is the most powerful thing that, in terms of apologetics, that we can show to an uncaring world. So this set the stage. This belief that, when I look back over to my disenfranchisement from atheists, even though I was still one, this kind of set the stage for what happened next. I look back over the years before my conversion, and I credit the birth of my first child with kind of that turning point for me. Now, it wasn't this cataclysmic moment where I, suddenly became a believer, but when I look back, it was definitely a turning point. When my son was born, after this perfectly wonderful pregnancy, no problems whatsoever, within 36 hours of his birth, he had to have a surgery. It would be one of 13 surgeries he would have before he was 3.5 years old. It was a very, very difficult time physically. And so when I got the news of that very first surgery, the surgeon, she came into my room and she explained that my son was going into surgery as we spoke. And so I called my husband and I said, you need to come down to the hospital. There's something that's going wrong here. And I've got to tell you at that point, here's the honest truth. I had not bonded with that child. I'd seen all those wonderful Lamaze tapes and they set the baby in front of the mother and she just, boom, there's this bond and you can see it. I did not have that. I was, under a lot of medication from it anyway. And by the time they actually brought me my son, I looked at him and I said, I don't think he even looks like me. I said, I think he belongs to somebody down the hall. I kid you not. I thought they brought me the wrong baby. I handed him back. And so the nurses are walking around going, oh dear, she's not bonding. So here I am now. I get this news that he's going into surgery. And they finally get him back into the NICU. And they get me up and I'm supposed to go down there. So I get my little pharmacy trolley and I've got all these tubes and stuff. And I'm kind of painfully walking down the hall to see my son. And I walked into that NICU. And I looked at this child, and someone had hurt him. Someone had cut him open and sewn him shut, put tubes in him, put needles in him, put adhesives all over him. And this thing happened to me. There was this switch that was turned on. It was almost like I wanted to become a spider. I wanted to drape myself on that bassinet and just dare anyone to touch this child again. And it was just like, boom, there was that bond. There was that amazing thing. There was that love that I'd never, ever felt before for this child. Now, over the next few years, my husband and I became regular guests at the Ronald McDonald House because this same child went on to need all these other surgeries. Very, very difficult time in our lives. Just keeping this child alive consumed all that we had at that time. And I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, but for me, I personally wouldn't trade it for anything because it was in that I believe I got my first powerful message from God. And I didn't know it at the time. It wasn't years later till I got it. But that powerful message from God was, to me who my identity was wrapped up in material gain and wealth. I mean, I was yuppie. I was a yuppie, as yuppie you could be. That's what I was at the time. Me who thought faith was for the weak-minded. I was the captain of my ship, remember? And the message that I got as I went on that horrific roller coaster ride for this child was, Carol Barnier, you are not in charge of squat. Because if you were, would you be here? Now, it was the first time that I began to reflect on a worldview that was perhaps different from the one I had held for 13 years. I began to see that maybe there was something bigger than me going on here. Now, since those early days of my faith doubts, I discovered there were answers to all the questions I had. I did not have anything new, and not only were there answers, sometimes they were answered centuries before by elegant minds, far brighter than my own. But I finally got a hold of, there was a wonderful pastor who walked me through this period. I basically went into his office once a week and I threw things at him, metaphorically. I would say, what about this? And he'd say, well, let's find out. And so through him, I learned about St. Augustine and C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer and Ravi Zacharias and Lee Strobel and Josh McDowell and others. I mean, I found beautiful answers to questions that didn't need to separate me from the church, even though they had. And so when the world had me wondering at that time if the person of Jesus was just a myth, isn't that astounding to you, that there are actually people who deny the existence of the physical person of Jesus? You can maybe deny his divinity. I would maybe go, but the physical person of Jesus, I'm not sure how you even go there. But yet that was part of what I had heard. And I've since learned how many extra biblical materials there are out there that support the existence of Jesus, even written sometimes by people who were antagonistic to the Christian movement, to the Christian church. I've since then learned about the archaeological evidence that supports the biblical record. Not about you, but I learned Bible stories in Sunday school And I didn't go to school and learn Abraham Lincoln stories. I learned about the history of Abraham Lincoln. So I thought all of the Bible was allegory. I thought they were all stories, because some of them were. And I didn't have discernment as to what was allegory and what was historical record. And we need to make sure our kids understand that. That, you know, the cities that they talk about in the Bible, you can walk over there and see a lot of them today. This is a historical record. Great portions of it are actually written not as allegory.